Now, Gauteng MEC for Finance and Economic Development, Lebogang Maile, this morning in a press briefing outlined key priorities of the 7th administration about the provincial budget as well as state of the Gauteng economy. Maile says Gauteng currently sits with a debt obligation of 17 billion rand, adding that the province has also struggled with revenue collection. For more on this, let's extend a warm welcome now to local government expert, Dr. Sam Koma. Doctor, good afternoon to you. Thank you so much for your time. So the breakaway provincial structure started with a lot of criticism on all fronts, outlined their key priorities this morning for the province, namely economic growth as well as infrastructure in order to accommodate the growing number of citizens with a special focus on the township economy.
Yes, thanks for having me and good afternoon to you. So basically what the Gauteng Finance and Economic Development MEC, Mr. Maile, presented today, it's more of continuation of the economic and development plans of the previous administration. In the main, of course, the issue of building township economies, the setting up of the Township Enterprise Fund in line with the passing of the Township Economic Development Act of 2022. So they're building on that momentum, the whole idea of setting up a provincial state bank. We know that it's an idea that was long mooted by the former Premier of Gauteng, David Makhura. So I think what he intended to do and to say is that we intend to intensify the pace at which these projects, programs, and also ideas have to be implemented, because what in a large extent he presented are some of the priorities projects that have long been put in place. But I think what he said is that let's infuse a sense of urgency and speed in the manner in which we proceed to fast track the implementation of these programs. And of course, in the long run, to benefit largely the township-based enterprises, the small business owners that still to this day are struggling to access capital or funding. And that is the reason the provincial government is now saying let's fast track the process of the setting up of the provincial state bank, which will be more of consolidating the existing development finance institutions, for example, your Gauteng Enterprise Propeller, and the others that have been set up by the provincial government into one institution that will cater for these enterprises in terms of extending access to financial resources, issues around financing, capacity building of these township-based enterprises.
You know, Doctor, very interesting that you mentioned that. But my question is now, how do you then fast track, as you've said, that continuation of priorities or projects from the previous administration when the issue of the growing occupants in the province, I remember they didn't mention the fact that most of these, in fact, are illegal immigrants that occupy those hijacked buildings and have taken over some of this very township economy and are responsible for the heavy burden of state resources like your health facilities and illegal connections of electricity, which basically cut deep into the provincial budget. How does then a province like Gauteng provide for these current existential factors?
Yeah, so that is the work of the law enforcement agencies, both at the provincial level and also the metros, because that is the work of the law enforcement agencies to deal with these issues that pertains to the illegal occupation of buildings and most importantly, the occupation of these township economic zones, the industrial parks that have long existed in most of the townships. We now know that they've also been penetrated. So that is a part of what needs to be tackled by the law enforcement agencies. But also the other fact that we also need to acknowledge is that Gauteng, being the economic hub, not only in South Africa, but broadly within SADC and also the continent, it will naturally attract immigrants. But now the question is, how do you address the issue of immigration, ensuring that they're properly documented, but also they're here for reasons that are linked to employment, issues of seeking refugee status, and all of that. So that's the area that they will always constantly have to grapple with, but also putting in place preventive, proactive measures to deal with this crisis of immigration, but also immigration. Citizens drawn from certain parts of the country also migrating to Gauteng.
You know, Doctor, you mentioned something very interesting, and I wanted to wait for it before we get to that issue of course, the proposed establishment of the Provincial Bank. So what do you think are the possibilities of this actually becoming a reality? Because we have seen calls for a state bank that have been met with quite a lot of disdain or not much support. I know you mentioned that the current premier had actually been mooted on the plans for the establishment of the Provincial Bank here in Gauteng. So what factors would also have to be considered before such a plan is actually initiated?
Yes, so what they need to do is to remove all the hurdles, all the red tape or bureaucratic processes linked to the setting up of this bank. Of course, the most crucial priority is for them to acquire the banking license from the South African Reserve Bank, having been granted approval by the National Treasury. Once they've sorted that out, is to set up the institution. So you're dealing with institutional and governance and regulatory mechanisms that will have to come into play, and also rationalizing the existing development finance institutions that the provincial government has already set up, the Gauteng Enterprise Propeller, the Gauteng Partnership Fund, and others into one body that will now fall under the Provincial State Bank. So it can be done if more focus is on removing all the bottlenecks and also putting money into the whole process of setting up the institute.
Now, Gauteng, Doctor, is obviously the economic hub of the country, yet still suffers high levels of poverty, unemployment, as well as social exclusion. What do you think is currently needed now to get this province back to working mode and back to a world-class city, especially under the new prescripts of the new government of provincial unity?
Yeah, so it's to get the governance right. The good thing about the Gauteng provincial government is that it is sitting with a huge capital, but that capital has to be prioritized in the most effective and efficient manner in terms of channeling it to the most needed areas, in terms of unlocking the potential of enterprises, those who intend to enter into businesses who require this capital, but also ensuring that in the long run, these individuals are fully capacitated, funded, and resourced, because we all agree that for the economy to grow, you need entrepreneurs to set up businesses in the different sectors, your manufacturing sector, your retail sector, automotive sector, which also the MEC flagged in its media briefing. We know the value add of the Ford Motor automotive business in the Tshwane Special Economic Zone that has attracted billions of investments, both domestic and foreign direct investment, and also creating space for these enterprises to also be absorbed into the mainstream economy. I think in the long run, the provincial government will be able to tackle and reduce these high levels of unemployment, inequality, and also poverty.
And in closing, Doctor, I mean, which ways can then the provincial government then support or bring in more resources as well as support, I suppose, around funding, as well as removing that bureaucracy and red tape that you mentioned in your previous point, in order to support and ensure the sustainability of those emerging entrepreneurs, particularly black entrepreneurs in the province?
Yes, they will have to leverage on the partnership with the private sector. We know the private sector is sitting with this capital, expertise, and also resources. Your commercial banks, international finance institutions, some are located in the Gauteng province. So they need to go all out, seek partnerships with these institutions with a view to leverage on this, but also to extend on this funding that they need to assist these enterprises, these potential entrepreneurs to be able to get assisted in terms of funding. And we know that the majority of our young people are brimming with beautiful ideas on how to set up their own businesses. But the bottleneck is around getting funding, where to get this funding. So issues of accessibility will also have to be prioritized by the MEC through his portfolio to ensure that the funding reaches a wider segment of the business sector in the townships and also in other urban centers.